Welcome to this week's edition of Black Authors Matter TV, where we interview the latest movers and shakers in the African American literary community. You'll meet some old friends, discover new ones, and stay abreast of the latest book developments around the country and even the world. So sit back and relax for the next 2 hours with Black Authors Matter TV co-hosts Gwen Richardson and Dr. Rhonda Lawson.
Good evening. You reached Black Authors Matter TV, and I'm Gwen Richardson, your host for tonight, and my co-host will be joining me shortly. She is in an airport, so she may not be able to be on for the whole show, but she will be on. And welcome to tonight's show. It's January 31st, the last day of the month, and the year's just moving right along. We're moving toward February, which is Black History Month. So for Black History Month, we are going to have you're going to be hearing from some authors you haven't heard from in a while. We did that last year, especially next week, but also later in the month. So that will be, you'll hear from some authors who they've written books in the past and there's been a hiatus. So, and at least one of them has something coming out soon. So we have another amazing show tonight. We're going to give away 2 books. Before we do that, I need to log on because Rhonda's not on, and I need to make sure that I'm able to check the comments. So if you all will be patient with me for 1 minute while I do this, and then we will bring on our first guest, who is Alvin Hall. And he has a new book called Driving the Green Book. So, and today is his release day. So as soon as I get the show pulled up so I can look at the comments, I will bring him on. Okay, so, and it doesn't say Alvin Hall, but I'm hoping this person is Alvin Hall. We'll see in a moment. But welcome to this week's show. If you haven't tuned in before, then welcome. If you're one of our regular viewers, then welcome back. And Alvin Hall's book is called Driving the Green Book. And we had an author on with the children's book about the Green Book. That's the historical Green Book that people used to travel in the South during Jim Crow, so they could know where it was safe to stay. And are you Alvin Hall?
I am Alvin Hall.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to get on and I was just waiting.
Yeah, well, we have a little we do in the beginning. We have an intro and then we do a couple of announcements. But Perfect. Welcome to the show. And
thank you.
I understand today is your book release date, if my information is correct.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, so congratulations on your book release.
Thank you.
Your book is called, do you have a copy of your book?
I do.
It's called Driving the Green Book.
Driving the Green Book. And it's based on a road trip that I took from Detroit to New Orleans, looking for places that had been featured in the Negro Motorist Green Book, people who had used those places, the community in which those businesses were located, as well as people's on the road experiences as they were driving north and south from these places.
Now, when you took your road trip, had you already planned to write the book?
Yes, I had already planned to write the book, but what changed was the material that I received. So initially it was just going to be a road trip going from place to place. But one of my rules for doing interviews is that I always make sure that I memorize all the questions so I can be fully present with the people, looking them in their eyes. I don't have a list of questions that I'm referring to. And often during the interviews, we would be so connected to the person that they would say, oh, you may not have time for this, but, or I have this other little story I want to tell. And we always built in that kind of time. So that led us to get all of these deeply personal stories, which at the end of the 2,000-mile trip, when I listened to what we had, it was very different from what I thought I would end up with. So then I cut the podcasts in a particular way around themes, the elders, themes like Little Harlems and that sort of thing. And then with the book, I reimagined the book as a standalone, complementing the podcast and the podcast complementing the book, but not mimicking it exactly at all. So it brings in more details. It provides more historical context about Reconstruction, about the emergence of Jim Crow, about segregation in the different laws in different states. And I add some personal information to it. So the book was reimagined even after the podcast.
Well, yeah, sometimes we start off with, when we're writing, and I'm a writer as well, when we start off with one premise based on where we think we want to go. And then on the journey itself, facts and people. And I'm sure that once you met some of the people, now, how did you know specific people you were going to interview when you started on, or did you go to these places and then meet people, or a combination?
I treated this whole production like a movie. I knew who I was going to see on what date and what time. So it was planned out. But I built into that some flexibility so that if somebody we were interviewing said, oh, you should talk to this person over here, or can I bring this person with me? We had that flexibility. We had to be strict with this because we had a budget. And we only had so many days to do this whole trip. We had to do everything in 12 days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In order to stay on budget and to get the information that we needed. So I was very much on task. I'm actually very good at that sort of thing. I love having a set limited period of time. We know what we need to get. And sometimes you end up, as we did in this case, with something that far exceeded our expectations.
Okay, so when you were, how did you select the people initially that you were going to interview?
We had a field producer, Olowakemi Aladesuyi, who was working here in New York City. And she and I met, and I said, we need to talk to historical societies in those towns, any Black sororities or fraternities in those towns, any NAACP chapters, any political officials involved in restorations of buildings and restorations of neighborhoods. So we started calling. She would call, and every once in a while I would talk to somebody. I was home visiting my relatives in the Florida Panhandle, and they told me about Senator Hank Sanders in Selma, Alabama, because my relatives lived near there. So I said, oh, he's there, and we called him. So we called around, and the key was to find people who were willing to talk about the past. As you probably know, a lot of people don't like to talk about the past. And I understand that totally, because my parents didn't either. They didn't want to burden us with that sort of the weight of prejudice or the weight of racism very early in our lives. So to find people who would be willing to talk about this honestly and openly was a challenge, but we found some great people.
That's really, really good. When you were on your travels,
yes,
did you stop at specific places that were in the Green Book? Did you pick places in the Green Book, and were some of those still around? Like
we chose
establishments
places,
and things like that.
We looked for places in the Green Book. So in every city, we had the Green Book with us, and we had a map of neighborhoods where places were listed. And often we tried to meet someone in that city. For example, in Detroit, we met Jamon Jordan, who runs a tour guide service there looking at historical Detroit. He was so incredibly useful and enthusiastic about everything he was doing. And he showed us places like the wall that separated the Black and white community, 6 feet high and a half a mile long in Detroit. Who knew there was a wall in Detroit, right?
Wow.
Most people don't even know that the wall still exists in Detroit. So in every city, we would meet people who would take us places, and then where we arrived early, we would go on our own. We found a lot of main streets that still exist: Walnut Street in Louisville, Jefferson Street in Nashville, Ferry Street in Jackson. But when you drive down those streets, as you probably have guessed, most of the buildings are gone. You may find a barber shop, a hair salon, or clothing store, or a fast food place there. But that's about it in most cases. Most of them have been ruined by urban renewal, because when they would route the highways, they would isolate these areas, business areas, and therefore it was not so easy to get to them. So we found some of the places. My favorite and the most memorable is undoubtedly the A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham. It was where Martin Luther King met. Room 30 was known as a war room. The A.G. Gaston was bombed during the period when Birmingham was referred to as Bombingham. And they're restoring that place, and they're doing a great job on it.
Oh, was this Gaston, were they involved in insurance?
Yes, insurance, Penny Savings Bank. He had a philosophy that if Black people needed it, he would provide it. Absolutely.
I remember reading something about Gaston, and there were a lot of Black insurance companies back during those days, because white people wouldn't sell the insurance to Black people, because a lot of the insurance back then was sold door to door.
That's right.
And the white agents wouldn't go in the Black neighborhoods. The reason I know this is because my father, who's passed, but he was involved in the funeral business. He was a pastor, but he apprenticed at a funeral home in Durham, North Carolina in the late 40s. And so he talked about the relationship between the funeral home and the insurance company, because people would get insurance for burial purposes.
That's right.
And then they might pay 50 cents a month, or I forgot what it was, but a small amount, but they would have enough to cover a burial.
Exactly. You probably remember, or your father told you about, they would leave the money on these little brown envelopes on a nail on the front door or outside on the front porch. And then the person would come by and pick it up. That's what happened in my neighborhood. I was raised way out in the country. So we might not be home, we might be home. So we just leave the money in a little envelope. And you're right, it was 50 cents or $1.50 would be left in that little envelope for the insurance man to pick up. And he would then mark something on that, and we'd know that he had gotten the money. And all those years, nobody ever took that money.
Yeah, I didn't know about the money on the porch, but people didn't steal from their neighbors then.
That's right.
They just didn't do it. It just wasn't done. So, you could leave your doors unlocked, especially in rural areas and things like that,
Oh, yes, we did all that, and you just drop by. You come and knock in. How many people do that anymore?
Right. Well, it could be dangerous now to do it.
Yes, true.
But
true.
And you don't know what you're gonna find,
Very true. But that's a key observation. That was one of the parts that made this trip interesting, because we had no idea what we were going to find when we met these people. We didn't do a lot of pre-interviews with the people, because I wanted to be fully present, meet them, and hear their stories unrehearsed from them. And in the book, I include their stories. I translated them as much as I could. I cleaned them up a bit occasionally to make them read a bit more smoothly, but they are beautiful stories. And I wanted people to hear the first person stories that I heard on the trip. And if I could have, in the audiobook, I would have cut in the people telling the story so you could hear all those wonderful, diverse Southern accents.
Now, the people that you met, what age are they now? What age span?
I would say most of them were in their 60s, 70s, and a couple in their 80s. And they had lived through this entire period of American history. And they told wonderful personal stories about traveling on the roads and how their parents protected them when they're homes. I always remember Hezekiah Jackson in Birmingham, Alabama, saying, when I was growing up, we didn't go beyond a 5-mile range. Everybody we knew was Black. All the stores we went to were Black. All the people in church we went to were Black. The only time we met white people was when we went outside of our neighborhood. And that was very much those protective neighborhoods. And the other thing that came up, a part of this that I love to this day, is people talking about how their families protected them from the horrors of racism, how parents would do anything to shield their children. Walking down the streets, they'd move the child to the right and step to the left if a white person was coming by, like a waltz as they walked down the street. Those kind of memories really touched me.
Yeah, the community, I tell people that are born, I guess, maybe after the 60s, because they would have no knowledge. But there really was a village.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I grew up, I was probably the last of the people who saw the village, some parts of the village. And it really was a village. And some people misinterpret what the village meant. It didn't mean that people did everything for you. You know, it meant that they supported you doing it for yourself.
Yes, exactly.
And the expectations were very high for the generations that were coming up.
Absolutely.
Very high. And everybody respected their elders. Everybody.
Oh, yes.
You respected every elder. They didn't have to be related to you. All elders were respected. And
absolutely.
You know, talking back or raising your voice, it just wasn't done. You didn't even think about doing it.
It wasn't done at all. And one of the most difficult moments for the trip for me personally was when, and I always think about Frank Figures in Jackson, Mississippi, when that man started to talk in that slow, very deliberate Southern drawl. It was like my uncle's son had been reincarnated right in front of me. And I had to struggle with my emotions. And finally, I had to get up and leave the room and just cry a little bit, because he was talking in a way that I knew that was so important to him about communicating that wisdom, the lived experience that he had to me and to Janae, that it was so penetrating. And these people gave me many, many gifts during this trip. And I wrote this book to give some of those gifts, as many as I could, to the public who reads this book.
So how is your book organized? Is it organized based on the timeline? Is it organized based on, do you have like the sections for each location you visited? How do you have?
No, I did not follow the locations because the themes of the trip were much more important. So I start out by explaining what the Green Book is and how Victor and Alma Green created the Green Book. And then I talk about the history of segregation and Jim Crow in America. I talk about Reconstruction. I talk about the passing of the amendments before Jim Crow and how Jim Crow came about. And then I go to how Southern states added more and more laws to restrict Black movement and interaction with white people. So I give you some historical context, and then I come back and start including the stories of people who lived through that time. And we progress forward, going through every little town that had what they called a Little Harlem, which was the main street of that period of time. And then by the very end, I'm in the contemporary world. So there I talk about how young entrepreneurs and artists are using the inspiration of the Green Book to create artworks, to create different publications, and to create websites that market to Black people. One of the questions I asked everyone was, do you think we need a Green Book today? The older generation said, I'm not going to go back to that. My parents fought for this country. They've paid taxes. I've paid taxes. I won't go back to that. Younger people felt that a publication that promoted Black businesses, that made us aware when we travel of Black-owned businesses that we could support and help keep our money in the Black community was very important. So you can see that the idea of the Green Book is evolving, and I wanted to end on something contemporary.
Okay, and that's, you know, the difference between something that would be done now and what was done back then was they didn't have choices.
That's right.
Now people have choices, but
That's
they
right. And
want
money.
to, yeah, and money. Right, and money. So they want to, and there is a strain of consciousness about the economics. I wish there was more of it, and I wish
Yeah.
it didn't have to be the catalyst for it didn't have to be some racist act.
Yes.
I wish it was more of a way of life, a way of doing things, something that you did just on principle as a regular thing. Uh,
Yes.
and
Yep.
maybe we'll get to that. Maybe that's on the horizon.
Let's hope.
Yes, let's hope. So when you went on your travels, how many states did you visit? What
Uh,
states did you visit?
ooh, we started in Michigan. We went to Ohio. We went to Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and New Orleans.
Okay.
And we stopped.
So
Mhm.
you didn't go to Virginia or North Carolina, South Carolina? You didn't go?
No, because one of the inspirations for this trip was an exhibition of Jacob Lawrence's works called The Great Migration. And I
Okay.
happened to see this at the Museum of Modern Art for a big landmark show. And at the very beginning of the show was an infographic showing how the African-American population in various cities had changed from 1910 to 1970 during the Great Migration. And I sat there and looked at them, and you could touch them and move them. In fact, it's still on the Museum of Modern Art's website, and you can move the bars and see how much they changed by. But the population in Detroit had changed significantly. In 1910, African Americans were 1.2% of the population. By 1970, they were over 43% of the population, one of the biggest changes. And I thought, standing there, all these people who came to work in the auto industry and related industries in Detroit came from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, the Florida Panhandle, Louisiana. So we would take the road trip through those states because people would be coming back from Detroit to see relatives, but relatives would also be coming north to see them in their new northern cities. And they might use the Green Book in both directions to find safe harbors when they were driving on those 2-lane roads, because this was before, of course, the interstate highway system was created. Right. So that's what determined the route. Of course, I would love to do another road trip or two, just to see what exists in other parts of the country.
Well, my roots are North Carolina and Virginia. I've been in Texas for a long time, but my roots are North Carolina and Virginia. So that's why I asked about it. And my parents used to travel. My dad was in the military, and he was stationed in Texas. That's why I was born in Texas, but I didn't live in Texas until I was an adult and moved here later. Yeah. But they drove from Texas to North Carolina. He was in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, and he said they used to have to drive straight through because you couldn't stop. So, and now I think he said it was 25 hours. It was a long, and they didn't have, there was no AC in the cars. But he also said that, there was some instances where, Black people they couldn't eat. If they did, they had to go around the back.
Yep.
But he said there were a couple of instances where the white people would pack some food up for them and give it to them. So, they would meet some friendly people, but the rule was you stop for gas. You start off with some food, you buy some chicken and have some food already prepared that would take you that first leg or so, the first day, the first 12 hours. And then, but he didn't stop. He drove straight through 24 hours.
Yes. And that's the story we heard again and again. And the fried chicken and the shoebox lunches, right? With the hoe cake bread and the tea cakes and the pound cake. We heard those stories again. I mean, and everybody remembers Stuckey's on the road, that chain. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We took a lot of road trips when I was growing up because my dad would drive it. We didn't go long distances, although sometimes we would, but a lot of 4 to 5, 6 hour trips because he would preach. He would do revivals and he would
Yes.
preach in different places. And there was always the Stuckey's bulletin boards.
That's right.
I don't remember stopping at Stuckey's. I just remember the bulletin boards.
Well, it's
But
so
yeah,
funny.
now, is Stuckey's still around? Is Stuckey's still around?
I don't know. But you know, your memories of Stuckey's reminds me of something that my associate producer and friend Janae Wood Weber said. She observed that all of us, as you and I did, we remember Stuckey's. We never went, of course, because Stuckey's had a very segregationist policy in those days. But she said the fact that when we recall it, none of us are hostile about it. We all laugh, as you and I just did, because for us it's a funny little memory. But she also said it reflects the grace in us, that we recognize the reality of it, but we still are willing to move forward and say that was then. And we can remember longing for Stuckey's, but it was a nice longing. It wasn't a bad thing.
Yeah, I haven't thought about Stuckey's in so long. When you mentioned it, because the billboard they had, the background was like an orange, yellowish color, and the
That's
word
right.
Stuckey's was in red, and it was like script. I don't know the things you remember. I think now Cracker Barrel is everywhere, but I think then it was Stuckey's.
Yes, it was. Yes, it
I don't
was.
know how old Cracker Barrel is. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. I have one more question, and it escaped me just then. I hate that when something's on your mind, because do you plan to do any sort of follow-up? You did say you wanted to go some other places, and do you plan to do any kind of follow-up to? Oh, now I remember. Now this is the question I do want to get in. There seems to be a resurgence in the interest of the Green Book. It's for years you didn't really hear anything about it at all, and then in the last, I'll say 8-10 years, it seems like there's a resurgence in the interest of the Green Book. What do you attribute that to?
Well, certainly the movie. Everybody knows about it because of the movie, and the movie really had nothing to do with the publication. Peter Farrelly, the producer of the movie, just chose the name sort of randomly for this publication, and it made people aware of how it was used because of the movie. But I also think things like Lovecraft Country and other movies like that, where scenes from the Green Book have been included, or moments from the Green Book have been included, have made people more aware of it. And I think some things are just rediscovered.
They are.
Over time, they're just rediscovered.
Yeah, that's true. Because there's the Going Places children's book about the Green Book. And I think I've seen a couple of other publications. I wanted to share a couple of the comments from people who were online that watch the show regularly.
Yes.
They were remarking about the little brown envelopes that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Tony Benita, she's a regular viewer. She said, my grandmother put her envelope under a pillow in the rocking chair. People could pick it up. They knew where to get it.
Yes.
So, and then a couple of people said that they grew up in the village too. Yes. And I wish the young people of today understood the village, because it was really special and precious.
It really was.
Yeah.
I was loved.
We'll never see the likes of it again.
Yeah. I was loved. I always think I was so happy.
Yes.
In that little place. Yes, it was segregation. Yes, we were really, really poor, but everybody else around us was poor. And we were so fed, clothed, watched after, protected.
We were looked after.
Yes.
Everyone looked after everybody. Yep. And the expectations were high for those coming up, the children and those growing up. They expected you to do your best.
Yes, always.
Do well, always. And you wanted to, because you wanted to reach, meet those expectations.
Absolutely.
Well, we're at the end of our time. Can you show the cover of the book again for those who,
of course.
So they may have tuned in later. It's called Driving the Green Book, and the author's name is
Alvin. There it is. Oh, it'll replace my face.
So thank you so much for being a guest on the show. And
Thank you very much.
congratulations on your book release day. I hope you sell tons of copies.
And thank you for having me on your wonderful show. And thank you for sharing your memories of Stuckies with me and laughing about them.
You are very welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was Alvin Hall, and that was an amazing story about his book, Driving the Green Book. Now, there is someone, our next guest is in the waiting room, but there's another name on here, and I don't know who it is. So I'm going to just bring that person on so I can see who it is, because I don't know if Rhonda is joining me from another location. So I don't know. T.S. Davis. Oh. You know what? It's the final guest. So now I realize that. So I'm going to ask the final guest, which is Tanita Davis. You're on early. I hope you can hear me. And I'm going to remove you from the screen, and then you can log back in. Your time is 8:30. If you're on the East Coast, it's 9:30. So you are an hour early. I don't know if you logged in but I didn't recognize who it was. So I'm going to remove you from the waiting room, and then you can log back in when it's your time for the interview. Hopefully you can hear me. And so I am going to bring on our next guest, and we're going to do the book giveaway at the end of this second interview, since we ran right up on the time with the first interview. So our next guest is Morenike Oyenusi. And Morenike, you all may have heard us talk about the J. Pinkney Children's Book Awards. We had 5 winners this year for that award. That was last year we had 5 winners, and one of the 5 winners won the grand prize, which meant it was the overall best of the 5. And that included a cash prize as well. So Morenike Oyenusi, she won for her book, Isaiah and the Isaiah and the Orchestra of Sounds. This is what it was. Sorry about that. And do you have a copy of the book with you, Morenike?
Hi there, Gwen. It's so nice to be on the show. I do have a copy right here.
Yes. So this is the book that won the grand prize for the JPP. Oh, and you have the sticker on the back.
Yes.
Your book, I think you were a finalist in 2 different categories, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I was. Educational and motivational, which was very exciting.
Yes. And I was on the panel of judges, and your book stood out immediately. Just beautifully done. Just amazing illustrations.
Thank you.
It was, the storyline was amazing. So why don't you tell us first about what motivated you to write the book, and how did you get the idea? And was this your first book?
This is my second book.
Your second book.
My first book is Chasing Butterflies in the Sunlight. And the idea for Isaiah and the Orchestra of Sounds came in 2019. I developed a condition called tinnitus, which is ringing or multiple sounds in your ear. And I began to have this experience, and I was absolutely traumatized by it. So I began to express my feelings by writing a poem of how I felt about this condition, because you constantly hear those noises in your ear, and the noises just were not going away. And so I began to write a poem, and eventually I turned that very long poem into the book that you have now, Isaiah and the Orchestra of Sounds. I got the idea, actually God gave me the idea to turn it into a graphic novel and have it illustrated, and that's what you have. So I'm really pleased about this product. But I wrote about it, but then I wanted to tell people, teenagers, young people who listen to loud music, who go to loud concerts, who go to loud football games, about the danger of noise and what it can do to your ears. Because one of the primary causes of tinnitus is loud noise, exposure to loud noise, which can lead to hearing loss, and hearing loss can lead to is one of the causes of tinnitus. So I wanted to make this a book that would have resources that would tell people just to be careful. So I wanted to turn my experience into a positive one to warn people about what this experience can do.
what made you come up with the whole orchestra of sounds and Isaiah and all of the instruments and all of that? Where did
Yeah,
that
so
idea
funny.
come from?
So the sounds, you know, the more I listen to those sounds in my ear, it just reminded me of an orchestra. That's what came to mind. I mean, even though an orchestra is typically a very nice experience, and this was not a nice experience, but the complexity of the sounds, the different kinds of sounds that you hear, and how you can pinpoint the each individual sounds, but together they make a whole sound. It just reminded me of the concept of an orchestra where you have different instruments making distinct sounds, and then everything comes together in harmony as an orchestra. And so that's where the idea came that, you know, Isaiah had this orchestra in his ear, and this orchestra just never went away. You know, you love going, you know, to listen to music, to watch an orchestra because it's a beautiful experience. But in this case, it just never went away. They followed him everywhere. And so that's
Oh,
how it just evolved into that idea.
oh, wow. So, can you show us some of the pictures from the book? I want people to see
Yes.
how beautiful it is on the inside. You have the outside with all the instruments
Well,
there,
that's
and
the
Isaiah
outside.
is beautifully illustrated. And on the inside, it's a graphic novel. So,
I just love my illustrator. He did a really, really, really fantastic job. And
he
I'm not
did.
sure, can you see this
Yes,
yes,
we can see it
yeah.
very well.
So those are
Mhm.
some of the images in there.
Yes.
Some of the images
Yeah,
in the book.
beautifully done work. How long did it take you to complete the illustrations?
So it took about a year for the illustrations to be completed. I
Mm.
think I contacted my artist in 2020 or 2021. And yeah, it took about a year to finish the project.
Wow. And I knew it took a while because I have children's books, and the length of time for a children's book is waiting and perfecting the illustrations,
Correct.
because the text is not that many words, especially at the lower grade levels. It's not like writing a 50,000 word novel. You know,
Right.
you might have 1,000 words, 1,500 words, or something like that. So the writing is not what takes the massive amount of time. Is getting the illustrations done and perfected, or sometimes even finding an illustrator. I would suggest people who are thinking about writing a book, the first thing you need to do is find an illustrator, because for a children's book, the illustrations are the most important thing.
Right. Except in this case, you know, so I've written 3 books now. My third book is about to be published, and that's really a picture book for ages 4 to 8. But I
Okay.
found that with each book, the process has been a little bit different, because in this case, Isaiah, I mean, it does have quite a few words in it. It's targeted towards the older child, ages 10 to 18 or so. And it did start off as being a very, very long poem, and which is where I guess the idea came to have it like a comic book, where you have
Okay.
all the strips, lots of words, but in a way that is presented in a way that really engages the reader. And initially I actually thought my age group was going to be ages 12 and above, but I find that lots of 10-year-olds have been interested in it.
I can
So
see
on
that.
right. On the other hand, the picture book that I'm working on now, as you said, it was, the words are not that many, but the pictures are, you have pictures on, big pictures on every page, and so the approach has been a little bit different with that.
Right, because what you have is more like, for lack of a better way of saying it, more like a comic book.
Correct.
With the segmented, is might be like 4 different things on the page, or even
Correct.
6 sections, like little squares. Whereas in your standard children's book for younger children, it's basically one big illustration on the page.
Correct. Yes.
So
Yes.
the process is different.
Right. Right. And the very first book I wrote, Chasing Butterflies in the Sunlight, now that's a chapter book. So that's a
Okay.
chapter book, and it has 1 illustration or 2 illustrations per chapter. The
Okay.
chapters are quite short, so now that book is about 110 pages, but I really did want it to be illustrated as well, even though, again, it's some of my readers are older, but anybody from the age of 5 can really read it. but I wanted it to, even though it's a chapter book, I did want it to be illustrated as well.
Okay, and having the illustrations in a chapter book kind of breaks it up a little bit.
Yes.
Breaks up the text a little bit, so it's just not all words.
Yes, yes. And I understand from what people have told me that readers expect pictures in books now. Apparently, I don't know if that's a new thing, but, even the older readers, they're engaged. They're more engaged in books that have some kind of illustration, even if it's one illustration every few pages. But apparently they really like that.
So, since you were one of the winners for the Jerry Pinkney Children's Book Awards, I want to ask some questions about that process. About what, how did you hear about the awards first?
My uncle, my father's brother, he's a professor of theater arts and English at Louisiana State University. And he's a playwright, and as well as being an English professor. And he told me about it. He sent me the form and I thought, oh, this looks really good. And so I applied, and I'm really grateful to him that I did that. When I won the award, he was one of the first people I told about the award.
Yeah,
so he told me about it.
See what happened when you So what made you submit your book? I mean, some people that we've talked to said they were hesitant at first or a little nervous, but they wanted to see. Some of them had never submitted anything before. Others had submitted their books to multiple places.
I just thought it sounded like a really great prize. Isaac Pinkney, the wonderful African-American illustrator. He's so world-renowned. But even apart from, I just thought it sounded like, I really love the categories that you put together. And I thought, well, there's something for everybody here. And I thought, my book would be a good fit. You have the education. I did apply for the educational and the motivational categories, but you had too many different other categories that I think people can find something to apply for.
Okay. And then one thing that we, in the process of doing the judging and having all the submissions come in for the Pinkney Awards for 2023, we did some adjusting based on what people submitted and what some categories that we didn't have a category for last year. So for example, we have a comic book category this time.
Oh, right. Oh, that's interesting.
And we have a graphic novel category this time that we didn't have before. And so that's just some adjustments we made based on what was submitted. And then some categories, they're not, our goal was to divide each category from K through 6 to, and then age 12 and up. But there were some categories where there was hardly any submissions for grade ages 12 and up.
Right.
So we just decided for this year to just have one category. Like I think African diaspora was one of them. Last year we tried to separate it, but we didn't get enough submissions. So we decided this year we'll just have one category because it's hard to know how many books are out there that people are going to submit.
Correct. It's difficult to really read.
It is really until you go through the process.
Yes.
And then, but it was a very engaging, very gratifying. It was difficult for some, in some categories because there were some really good books that were finalists. And so I think one of our judges is online watching. I think she hit it. Oh, Mary Evans is one of the judges that was on the panel. And she said, "Hi, Morenike, excellent book. Congratulations on your grand prize win."
Oh, thank you. That's so nice.
Yes. So what have you been doing with the book since you got the award or since then? Have you submitted for any other awards? Have you gotten any other calls or people wanting to interview you or articles in your local paper? What's been happening for you?
So I have another interview coming up, I think probably in another month, and people want to interview me, not just about that book, but my other book as well. But it's been an interesting process. Right now I've been really focused on my third book, So, and as you probably know, as a independently published author, there's so much that you have to do in the business yourself, and
Yes.
that takes up
Yeah.
so much time. So as much as I would like to spend, I really, it really is my desire to get this book across to different audiences around the world, but it's then you have to balance the time that you have. And then because you're doing marketing and you're doing publicity, and then you're also working on your other books. So that's been a challenge.
Okay. So I do want to ask also about the process in terms of when you were notified about being a finalist and how that felt. And then when you found out you won, how you felt about that?
So when I found out, and I'd actually been praying about this. I was praying that I would be a finalist, but I was so excited when I found out I was a finalist in 2 categories. I mean, I remember I was sitting in my bedroom and watching this, and I was like, screaming and trying to take a screenshot to so I could show people some of my friends were already watching it. But when I got the so for the grand prize award, I had actually tried to watch, because I knew you were going to be presenting this at the National Book Awards festival, and I didn't see anything about it, and I thought, wow, I haven't heard anything, and I wonder, whether I did, I just wonder what the results are. I just really was so curious and looking forward to hearing. But then the way that I heard wasn't the way I was expecting to hear, because you sent me an email, and I was in my room again, and I was jumping up and down. I was so excited. I felt like a little girl. I won.
I understand, because I've been nominated for a few things, and
right.
It is exciting. I've been like the finalist several times. It is very exciting. The very first time is the most emotional,
right?
Because it's one is unexpected. It's the first one. It's like your first child. It's like,
right. And that's true too. I mean, for my first book though, I mean, I did win an award for that, and I know I was excited, but I cannot remember what I was doing when I found out. But I remember the details of what I was doing when I got the finalist awards for this, and also the grand prize award. And I remember my emotion, and maybe because it was more recent as well, but it certainly struck a note it struck a larger note for me. And it's just even I guess the nature of the award, the fact that it's an Isaac Pinkney Award, the fact that it just held so much emotion for me. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's the other winners said the same thing too. We've had all but one on and we actually I wanted to have you on last because you were the grand prize winner. So we've had 4, including you. But the other young lady, she couldn't do an interview till next, like the middle of next month. And I didn't want to wait. So we just did them a little bit out of order. But you're next to the last, because I wanted to have it like in order. These are the finalists and this is the grand prize winner. But what advice would you give people in terms of if they want to write a children's book and write an award-winning children's book? What are some of your secrets or some of the things that you did, some advice that you can lend to?
I would say the first thing is write with passion. Passion, you've got to really, when you write, you've got to be passionate about what you're writing. And I think that passion comes across your readers. And then secondly, you've got to really, really do a good job. Pay attention to detail. You can't afford to overlook anything, because you want the best. I mean, my approach with anything, and especially with my books, is that I want this to be the best possible. I'm not thinking about the awards it's going to win, but I just want it to be the best possible book, on that subject. And so I think just write with passion, and then just do your best, and proofread and read and reread and have other people look at it for you. And I think that's what I would share with other people. And don't give up. Never give up. My first book took me 14 years to write. I was in the middle, I was raising my children, but it was just a book that I knew from my teens that I wanted to write. And so it stayed with me. And I wrote a little bit at a time, and it just seemed to be taking forever. But I just knew I had to get it done. So don't give up. Whatever it is that you're passionate about, just keep doing it, and then you'll get it done.
Well, that's certainly good advice for everybody. And that's good advice for anything that you're working on.
That's true.
Any project you have, especially something creative.
Yes.
And the fact that your first book took 14 years. We've heard that many times from authors who've been guests on the show, that usually it's the first book that takes a long time. And then after that, you kind of know how to do it. So it's not quite as long.
Right.
The rest. For me, my first book, I wrote it in 8 months because it was based on something I had been working and thinking about for many years, but I had never planned to write a book. But there was an event that was a catalyst for me to just sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna write this book. And so I was diligent about continuing. But then my second book, which was a novel, which is not my strength. Fiction is not my strength. My strength is nonfiction, and my children's books are very good. That took me 5 years. So it just depends on, but then after that, I have 14 books now. So
wow,
after that,
impressive.
I started writing. I started writing. I'm working on 15. I have an idea in my mind for 16 and 17.
Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Well, once you do a book and especially when you self-publish, the mystery and the fear is you're not afraid of it anymore. You're not hesitant about doing it. The process. You're set up with hopefully with your editor, the people that you work with, that you bring in when you self-publish, your illustrator, your editor, your graphics person. You have those people. You have your network of people already set up. So, and if you have to change one or two, I did a book. I have a book series that I did I had one illustrator for. It's called Kids Biz. But I did another book called Boss Women that was actual biographies of Black women in business. And I needed an illustrator that could take a photo and then do an illustration from a photo. Now that was a different process. So I had to get a different illustrator for that. But that's why I said the illustrations that's what takes with children's books. And it should.
It should.
And people who don't take the time, months, to finish their illustrations, it shows. If they just put something out quick. If it's fast on children's illustrations, you need to think about it some more, Yeah,
because they're just as important. The illustrations are, even more so with picture books, because they really tell the story.
Yes.
And so you've got to be detailed with that as well.
Right. And it's going to cost a little money, because good illustrators aren't cheap. And, you can get somebody new that's just starting off trying to make a name for themselves, but they may not understand all the ins and outs of doing something for a book.
That's true.
They might be a painter, or they might be, they might do other kinds of illustrations, but they might not understand how to do a book.
That's true.
It. So Morenike, are you from England?
No, I'm from Nigeria originally.
I
did go to school in England.
Your accent sounds British.
I went to school in England.
Oh, okay. I knew I heard some. I heard that in there. So you're from Nigeria, but you went to school in what college in England?
I did some of high school in England in a place called Croydon, Surrey, and then I went to the University of London, and then I also went to the University of Cambridge.
Oh, okay. All right. And what do you do like for your day job?
I'm a lawyer. I work with Howard County government, which is one of the local governments in Maryland on the East Coast. And so I'm a lawyer for them in my daytime.
One of the other finalists was also an attorney.
Oh, really?
Detrain Sanders. I don't know if you saw the list of names. She was a lawyer too. Because when I told the audience, when we evaluated the books, we evaluated the books on their own merit.
Of course.
Book. So we didn't know if the author, it was the author's first book, their 50th book. We didn't know. We didn't even consider any of that. Each book,
yes, that's
was
right.
evaluated on its own merits. So,
right.
Well, show us the cover one more time. We're at the end of our time. And Morenike, the winner of she was a grand prize winner of the Jerry Pinkney Children's Book Awards for 2022 for her book, Isaiah and the Orchestra of Sounds. So congratulations again, Morenike.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for being on the show and continued success with your writing and your book publishing.
Thank you. I appreciate your inviting me to be on the show. Really had a good time talking to you.
Okay, well, have a great evening.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Rhonda was in the airport. She was supposed to come on, but I guess, she said her plane was going to be boarding at 9. So that was why she could only be on for a short period. But when you're traveling, anything can happen. So we hope wish her safe travels from Florida back to the DMV, and we'll see her next week. So I would do, before we bring on our next guest, I have 2 books to give away tonight. The first book is called The Emancipation of Slaves Through Music. It is by Matthew Knowles, and we had one of Matthew Knowles' books a couple of weeks ago. This one, we're going to ask a different trivia question, and the question is, at which HBCU did Matthew Knowles obtain his bachelor's degree? So Matthew Knowles, he's a music executive. For those of you all who probably know, he also is Beyonce's father, and he was her manager for many years. And so if you want that book, then answer that. Which school did he go to for his bachelor's degree? And then the next, the second book that we're doing, this book is called Scatterings, and the author's name is very difficult. And I think I pronounced the last name is Menenze, but the first one, I'm not going to even try. But the book is called Scattering. And the plot of this book is about the Immorality Act is in South Africa, which was the law that prohibited interracial marriage. And so the trivia question is, in what year was the Immorality Act, which prohibited interracial marriage in South Africa, in what year was it passed? So it's a specific year that that's done. So if you answer one of those questions, you will get a copy of the book, and it will be mailed to you. Now, someone's already answered. You all are fast. Before I can even Mary got it correct. The school is Fisk University. Tony Bonita, you said the University of Tennessee. That wasn't it. And someone else, Herstory Reimagined, said it too, but the answer came in later. Mary Evans had the first answer. So let me make a note of that Mary Evans gets that book. And this book, Scattering, if someone answers it correctly before the end of the show, we will send it to them. Let me put Mary Evans on here. And okay, so our next guest is Sharlyne. I'm not sure if her name is Sharlyne or Sharlyne. I think it's Sharlyne though. Sharlyne Rogers. And she has her book is religious faith-based. She's an inspirational speaker and a professional editor. And her book is called Fear Not, but she uses the word fear, and she has a question mark, fear, and then she has the word not after that, meaning no, like, So she separated the words because she wanted people to know that fear is not something that we're going to be embracing. So, Sharlyne, if you will unmute your mic so we can hear you, we see you, and you're wearing your t-shirt and cap. Yeah, a t-shirt and cap.
Yes.
So, welcome. Now, your name is pronounced Sharlyne?
Sharlyne.
Sharlyne, okay. I said
Yeah.
it could be either one, and you never know. And I'm sure I'm not the first person who's called you Sharlyne.
Not at all. It's not spelled like Sharlyne, so it's okay.
No, it's not. So, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV, and congratulations on the release of your book. Now, this isn't, you have several books.
Yes, ma'am.
I saw it in here, 7. You have 7 nonfiction books so far. So you write nonfiction. And are all your books inspirational? Or they all religious based?
All faith-based, yes, ma'am.
Faith-based.
Yes.
Okay.
Prayer. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do you decide what topic you're going to select? Because when we go into the Bible, you know, the Bible is a living document. It's a living book, and there's always revelation and inspiration coming from it. But what inspires you on the different topics you write about?
The Lord, obviously. My very, very, very first book that came out in 2007 is called When Heaven Hears Your Prayer. And so the Lord brought me out of religion into a relationship. And the first thing that he told me to do when he sent me to my very first non-denominational church was to get into the prayer room. And so after a few years, he said, okay, I taught you how to pray. Now you write a book and teach other people how to pray. And so each book it's inspired by what he's telling me, what's going on in my life, you know, faith, speaking life, fear not. I actually wrote it. This was like at the height of the pandemic in 2020 when this book was released. But I wrote it because I was in an abusive relationship and I was in fear for the majority of that relationship. And that's why I wrote that book, because I was so mad at the enemy for making me afraid. I said, okay, I'm going to write a book about fear to teach other people how not to fear.
Okay. How did you ultimately get out of the abusive relationship?
Ooh, the Lord made a way of escape for me. And when I wrote the book, it was so funny because I wrote the book again because of this relationship, but I stayed in that relationship and then took it a step further and got married to this individual. And then about a year later, the Lord brought me out alive and well. And it was, I actually have a YouTube playlist on my channel now, telling my testimony every week. Every Saturday morning, a video is released about different aspects of my life with him and just with other. I realized after I got out that he was a narcissist. And so then, you know, God tells you about one narcissist and all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, my father was a narcissist. You know, my friend was a narcissist. My boss was a narcissist. And so writing is a release. You know how people write songs because they broke up with somebody and they write a song. And so that's what it's like for me. But that's, God made a way of escape. My very first video, I actually went to a mental institution for 5 days. That is how God brought me out of that relationship. It was just a quick, like God had already given me the strategy to get out because I was suicidal. And I've been in church my whole life, but it was so painful and so hopeless. I was suicidal. And I said, okay, God, get me out of here because I don't even want to live anymore if I have to stay in this relationship. And so the day that it happened, it was just that Kairos moment that get out, walk out the door and leave and don't come back. But God had already given me the strategy. If something else, big or horrible happens, go to the local mental health facility. And I went there for 5 days and never looked back. And that's how I escaped.
That is a really, really compelling story. But it's not uncommon.
Which is sad.
It is sad. But what happens a lot of times with women, and it's it can be a variety of things that they are hoping will get better if they get married.
Right.
Abuse is the worst.
Yeah.
But also, I've just in talking to other women. And, I was in a bad first marriage, but praise the Lord, I never was abused. I never did have physical abuse, but, just a person who just would not be responsible for me, the home, or even himself, and so I thought he was showing signs of irresponsibility. See, these red flags, they do show. God gives us a discerning eye, but we have to use it and act on it. And there were signs of it before the marriage, but I said, well, once we get married, he'll change. Men don't. And I'll say, I have to say men, because I don't think women do either, but I know men don't change for the better after you marry him. If whatever he is before, if it's bad, it's going to get worse. If it's good, it'll probably stay the same, or it could get better. But if it's bad, if it's negative, it is not. And I had a friend that I talked to, she said he was cheating on her when they were dating. He thought if he got married, he would stop cheating. No, he didn't stop. It just got worse, because then they think they have you then.
Exactly.
You're locked in then.
Right. And thank God my abuse was not physical. It was verbal, emotional, and mental, but that was bad enough.
Yeah, that's bad. That can be worse in some ways. Yeah. Because words can cut you. I mean, especially someone that you love and is supposed to love you. Right. Saying horrible things to you, or about you, or using the wrong tone, yelling, never having a kind tone or kind words or words of endearment. So, yeah, all of this abuse. In my situation, if he wasn't there enough to really do, he disappeared. For days on end, he would disappear for days. It's when you're young and you think that you don't know, you don't notice things, you just hope it'll get better, but when it just gets worse and worse and worse, then sometimes God does give us a way of escape. And the Bible says God will give us a way of escape, but we have to take the way of escape too.
Exactly, because we try, especially in an emotional,
abusive, an emotional situation.
We're trying.
You are trying to, and if you're trying to live according to your vows, you want to try to make it work. Hopefully we're ministering to some people out there that will see this video. You want to, if you're in the body of Christ and you're a wife, you want to honor your vows. And but even the Bible gives you a grounds for divorce or separation. It gives you adultery or abandonment. And so God knows that not every situation can stay permanent and both people thrive in it or even are whole, because those bad situations can really break you down. They can break down your self-esteem. Yes. You take a financial hit usually, because you have to leave everything behind if you had anything. And when you're starting over, it's like you're starting your life over. Exactly. As this other person that isn't the person that was in the bad marriage. So anyway, I don't want to say, I know how it feels to be where you were, to say, hallelujah, I got out. Thank God I escaped. Because some people don't, they just stay, especially when they have children. Did you have children?
Grown. I'm a grandma.
Okay. So you weren't in. Okay, so that wasn't a factor for.
No, but a lot of people, they stay and pray.
Yes. Or they get pregnant thinking he'll change. So if he didn't change when you got married,
it's a lot of times it gets worse.
It gets worse.
Yeah, I was
because
just on a live on YouTube.
they start to feel trapped, and then I didn't have I by choice I didn't have any children because I could see if he wasn't taking care of me, I wasn't going to bring a child into it.
Right.
It wasn't going to be taken care of.
Exactly.
So when you wrote the book Fear Not, and you share that message with other people, and it could be men, women, it doesn't have to be marriage, it could be anything, it could be any kind of situation. What do you want people to get out of that? The fear with the question mark and the not.
Right. The question mark, and that's why I said at the end of my book trailer, we have to look the enemy straight in the eye and say, fear not, I'm not afraid of you anymore. Because there are so many things in life that we can be afraid of. And I listed all the things. And it was funny because even though, again, I wrote this book because of him, I didn't mention anything that I was actually afraid of in that relationship because I was still in that relationship. So I didn't say anything about abusive relationships, but I said, oh, if you're afraid of the bill collectors, if you're afraid of the bosses, if you're afraid of the bullies, if you're afraid of the apocalypse or death or sickness. And then I'm giving all these scriptures to encourage you. If you're afraid of these things, there's a scripture where God is telling you, don't fear that. So this book is talking about everything except for what I was actually afraid of. But my next book, number 8, is going to be about my life in that abusive relationship and how I got out and how I'm on my healing journey now, and the, support group that I had to get into, to get that corporate anointing of prayer and support. And because if you've never been, especially in a narcissistic relationship and domestic violence, because it's literally the same thing, if you've never been in that relationship, we have no idea what it's like. So you have to be around other survivors, other people that have escaped or that are still in it and are trying to figure out how to escape. So I thank God. I always thank God for my testimony because Romans 8:28 is true. All things work together for our good.
That's true. And a lot of times people don't want to share their experiences because they think people will judge them.
Right.
And, for years, I didn't tell people about things but when you get to a certain point and and it can help somebody else. Well, one, you find out just in talking to people over the years that it didn't just happen to you.
Right.
It's happened to millions of people. There's nothing new under the sun and all that. I mean, it's happened to many people. It's not the same people, but the situation is the same. It's the same set of circumstances. It's the same pain that the pain you feel, sometimes the hopelessness you feel.
Right.
If you pray though, God gives us a way of escape.
Exactly.
And that's why it's important for believers to use their meditation and faith and pray and share and support other people, because you never know what words that you said that could just have a healing effect.
Exactly. Yeah. And because other people have shared their testimony with me, I'm able to share my testimony. That's what Jesus, told Peter. He said, Satan has desired to sift you as wheat, but I pray for you that your faith doesn't fail. So when you're converted, strengthen your brethren. And so I've been converted. So now I can strengthen my brethren. And so literally the first thing that I did when I first got this book published, I sent it out to domestic violence shelters because again, that was the real reason why I wrote the book. And I just said, here, can I please donate 10 or 20 books to your facility, because I know that they're afraid. Especially I volunteered at a domestic violence shelter before. I've been to one before. And so I've seen the fear in their eyes. I've heard the stories still. I was just on a live YouTube last night watching other ladies tell their stories. And I was in tears because I know that pain. And I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my God. Just thinking about what if this happened? What if that happened? But the strength in our weakness, God has made, his strength is made perfect. And so I thank God that I know his word. If I didn't know his word, I wouldn't have any hope to hold on to. So that's why all of my books are faith-based. They're all, I'm going to give you the scriptures. If I'm talking about prayer, I'm going to give you the scriptures on this is how you pray. If I'm talking about fear, I'm going to give you the scriptures where God is saying, fear not, fear not, fear not. I mean, there's one whole page on there that's fear not, fear not, like that. We can't be afraid anymore. There's things, like I said, I even mentioned in the book, there's natural fears. Yes, I live in Florida, so there's bears walking around trying to mess with people.
You don't have bears?
Not where
Are
I
you in
live.
the Panhandle?
Not where I live. No. I'm in Central Florida, but there's bears,
Okay.
there's snakes slithering through backyards.
Well, y'all got alligators.
Yes, hopping into people's pools. So that type of stuff, yes, you should be afraid. I was a single mom for 20 years and I had to kill a tarantula in my kitchen by myself. So I've been through some fearful things. So yes, you should be afraid of that, but you should not be afraid. I've been laid off twice and was this close to being homeless. If I didn't own my home at the time, I would have been homeless. But God allowed for the home to pay, my house paid for itself. So things like that, we can't fear. I got laid off twice. The first time I had a home equity line of credit on my house. So I just transferred that into my account every month. Okay, my bills are paid, not a problem. For 8 months, I couldn't find a job. And then when I found another job, 2 years later, I'm laid off again. Then I got scared because all that extra money was gone. And so I woke up in torment. As soon as my eyes opened up every morning, I was in torment and fear of paying these bills and paying off that home equity line of credit. And maybe a year later, God canceled that debt. Supernatural debt cancellation. I even asked for it. It was just canceled. And God's like, so why were you afraid? I canceled it. You didn't even ask me to. So why were you afraid? And we just have to be reminded. I'm sent to remind the believers, there's a scripture for everything that's going on in your life. Every issue, every problem, every question, there's a scripture for it. And every time I speak, I'm ending talking about trusting God. I'm like Paul said during that storm he was in, and he just said, I believe God. Period. And I just believe from Genesis to Revelation, that's it. That's all I have is God's word and my testimony. So that we have to believe the word. We have to stand on the word.
Yeah, one of my favorite scriptures is God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power. See, sometimes fear will come, but right. God has given us a spirit of power and a sound mind. That means that we have to take action. We can't, waiting and just like cowering in fear is not an option. It's also not a strategy because whatever the situation is, generally it's not going to go away by itself.
Exactly.
That's why he gives us power to use and a sound mind to make a rational, not just use your power and just be like a chicken with the head cut off, rudderless, but it's a sound mind. So that means we're supposed to use our brains too, as well as our spiritual power.
Right. I actually have a book about the biblical guide to critical thinking, and it's about making decisions. So it's true. Everything, because we're body, spirit, and soul. So we have to remember that, the word of God is for our spirit, but our soul, that's our mind. So we have to, make sure that our mind is clear and not, bombarded with news. I don't even watch the news. I get news from social media, literally. Because
the news can be so depressing. I especially local news, because what I tell my husband, the local news is like the worst things that happen in Houston today. It's all about death.
Right.
And so I just don't want to see death every day. And now that we had this situation in Memphis where they're showing that over and over, which God knows that was just a horrible situation, and that's a whole nother topic. But I really feel for the mother of that young man. But it was so unnecessary, that whole thing. It just seemed like they were out of control from jump, and they just it was like they were on 10. They just went in, grabbed them. That's not what you do when you stop somebody in a traffic stop. You don't grab them out of the car. First of all, you don't know if they're armed or not. So but the whole thing is just tragic. It's an unnecessary tragedy, you know.
Yeah.
I really feel for the mother, but it's the media, they promote fear.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
they like to keep people afraid and, you know, in a state of hysteria,
Right.
and emotion.
Right.
And so I don't like to give into it. I
Yeah.
try not to. I read a lot. I'm always
Mhm.
reading books, and I mostly read fiction, not exclusively, but
Right.
and I write a lot. So I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm thinking, I'm asking. I ask for revelation. I
Right.
ask for discernment. I ask God for vision and wisdom.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I mentioned about the media and social media, the fear and the lies. And it's like, whose report are you going to believe?
Right. Social media, it started off with a good intent, I think.
Right. Exactly.
But what it's doing to children is really,
Oh,
is
yeah.
really criminal. And I'm not sure what can be done about it, because there's so many children with devices, and
Right.
tablets and phones at 5 and 6 years old.
Exactly.
And so they're not even developing the other side of their brain.
Right.
Everything has to be stimulated with the screen all the time. And
Right.
that's not good.
Exactly. I have 2 grandkids right now, and I'm like, yeah, you can turn off your tablet, for a few minutes and have a discussion or read a book or do a puzzle or something. That when we were young, we were outside, we were playing with our dogs.
We were outside. We were
Yeah.
outside. And now, you know, another thing is you have so many obese children because they're not outside. They're not active. They're
Mhm.
sitting somewhere on a phone. And I
Right.
know initially some parents did it to keep them quiet, but
Right.
you need to be engaged with your children. You
Yeah.
don't need to just hand them over to a device, because these devices, they can be pulling up all manner of stuff,
Yes.
all manner of stuff that children should never see,
Exactly.
because there's
Exactly.
no filter. I don't, you know, when they first came out with the internet and the cable, they used to say you have parental controls. That was
Right.
bunk. That was bunk.
Right. Right.
That was
But now even the cartoons,
right,
the children's
right,
movies
right,
are not
right.
for kids.
They're not for kids. They're not for kids. They're not for children. But there,
Yeah.
you know, there is such a thing as age inappropriate material.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
children don't need to see everything. They
Right.
need to have innocence. And when they get older, then they can decide that when they're over 18. But when they're under your charge as a parent, you should be protecting them from their eyes and their ears and
Yeah.
their spirit from all of this stuff that people have out here. It's just it's I don't know where things are going. We have to, those of us who are believers really need to be in
Exactly.
prayer,
Right.
and we need to help anybody we can if they will listen. You know, a lot of times you try to give people advice or tips, but they don't listen.
Right.
You can help, but you can't. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And so, but
Mhm.
these parents take, and you know, I hear people say, well, my kid won't do whatever. I'm like, what?
Right.
Take the phone. It's you're paying for it. Take the
Exactly.
tablet. They wouldn't have it if you weren't paying for it. Take it and put it away somewhere where they can't find it. And
Yep.
and force it. You have to force the issue. You
Yeah.
can't let them just stay on these devices, because they won't know how to think. They're not
Exactly.
using their brain.
Right, right. And I'm an editor also. And so I love that you guys have so many children's authors, represented, because I edit children's books too. And especially the ones that, show brown people, in the illustrations, because I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have a book that I can look at the book and say, oh, that little girl looks like me. So I thank God for that. So thank you guys for what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you. It's important. We can't sit around and wait for somebody else or other people or whatever, the government, which is the government, they hardly ever get things right.
Right.
They might have a good intention, maybe. I'm not even sure about that. But the way they go about it, it's just the end result is just normally what you didn't want.
Right.
So you have 8 books or 7? Is this the 7th book? Fear Not,
Yes.
The 7th book.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And from the books that you've written, what would you say is your best book that you've gotten the most attention for, that gotten the most traction? Not necessarily even the most sales per se, but just what's like your signature book that you among
I think it's my very first book, because it's called When Heaven Hears Your Prayer. And so a lot of people don't pray because they don't know how to pray. There is a way to pray effectively. That's what the Bible says, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And so, like I said, I was taught how to pray the word. And so that book is it's just word, word, word. This is how you pray. Oh, you need healing. This is how you pray for healing. Oh, you need this. And just that, I know that book has just really blessed a lot of people. I used to have a sign on my car, and I'd be going through the drive-through, and people say, oh, I need to learn how to pray, because the sign said, do you need to learn how to pray? And they're like, yes, I do. And I would reach back and here's the audiobook CD, be blessed. And I gave away, especially the audiobook CDs, because people need to learn how to pray. That's the biggest thing. Once you learn how to pray, then okay, now let me get in the word, and now I need to pray for faith. Okay, let me look up all the faith scriptures. Now I need to pray, for my mind. Now let me look up all the, the scriptures about the mind. So yeah, When Heaven Hears Your Prayer, my very first book, has definitely been the most popular.
Well, we also have some comments. I want to read some of the comments that people are saying. She said her first book, Chronicle, this is her story reimagined. I'm not sure what her name is, but that's what her moniker is on here. She says in her first book, it chronicled traumas she experienced and the plan to escape, but prayer and willing to believe what he would want from me and my own deserved level increased when she prayed. So she said, amen, Gwen, sound mind and action. It's true. You have to take action. I tell my daughter, waiting is not a strategy.
Right.
It just,
and that's what people do. They say,
they just wait and think everything's gonna just somehow magically change. No, it doesn't. And if it does, it doesn't change in the way you want it to do. You know, it doesn't change for your good most of the time if you're just waiting.
Yeah.
You have to take action.
Yep.
Yeah. And so let me see, someone else said, Shannon Micah said, y'all are teaching. That's what she said about us. I hadn't planned to, but just some of the things that you were bringing up just brought some things to my mind that I, share with people. I've had people tell me, and they've said it to me online in different situations, that I've never been through anything. They assume I've never been through anything because I don't talk negatively, but I believe first, optimism is better than pessimism.
Right.
Optimism can actually do something.
Right.
Pessimism, with pessimism, you are just like bound. You're just afraid to even move or do anything. And optimism gives you ideas. It gives you hope.
Right. Yeah, we're not supposed to look like we went through the fire. The 3 Hebrew boys did not look like they went through the fire. We're not we're not supposed to. We're supposed to come out stronger. And I'm not the same person that I was. Absolutely. Inside and out. I'm not the same person I was. So again, I thank God for that testimony.
Right. And you can help other people if you've gone through something and overcome it. You can really just be a testimony for other people that yes, you can go through some things, but you can come out of it. And you know, you can't really learn things if everything is always, if you never have to go through any obstacles, you don't grow. That makes you grow, and that gives you wisdom, and it just, it gives you more, really a better appreciation for God and the Holy Spirit and what Jesus sacrificed, so that we have hope, we have mercy, we have grace. And so we don't have to walk around with our heads down and feeling bad all the time. So Sharlyne, show us a copy of your book, your new one, Fear Not, and it is available where?
On my website at takeupthysword.com. And of course, it's on walmart.com, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, booksamillion.com. But yes, on my website, takeupthysword.com.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV, and continued success with all of your books and overcoming. You're an overcomer. So I believe that your days going forward will be pleasant and hopeful, and you'll find some companionship that will remove those bad thoughts, the bad experiences. They'll just be in the back. They'll be in your rearview mirror.
Right. Amen. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for being a guest. Okay, so we have one interview remaining, and it's with Tanita Davis, and I had clicked it earlier because I wasn't sure who that was. And so Tanita is a middle school, she does middle grade books, and she has a new book out called Figure It Out, Henri Weldon. And we gave away an advanced reading copy of the book, I want to say a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And that particular book is about a math disability, but she also has other books that are for middle graders. And I hope she's at her computer so we can, let me see. There we go. Okay. Because I admitted you earlier. I hope did you see that?
I had turned it on and just had gone off, but I came back and I said, oh, I must have been too early, and it just fell off. But
yeah, and sometimes people, the show time is Central Time, because I'm in Central Time in Texas, and my co-host Rhonda, she's traveling, she's on a flight, so she's not on the show tonight, but she was in New Orleans, so we were both on Central Time when we first started the show.
Oh,
so we just kept it on Central Time as the time, and she's now in the DMV, the DC area. So welcome to the show, and congratulations on your book. We gave an advanced reading copy of Figure It Out, Henri Weldon, about a month ago, because we got some from HarperCollins. So, and that's about a math disability, correct?
It is.
So are all of your books about disabilities, or just that particular one?
Just this particular one. I write, what I used to do was teach middle school. And so I came across a lot of different things that were not necessarily, attached to any kind of learning disability. But then I did specifically teach at a school for kids with learning disabilities. And I realized that I'd never seen anything. There's a lot of talk about dyslexia. There's a lot of talk about, some of the behavioral things that kids get up to. And a lot of kids have a math fear. A lot of adults have a math fear, but there is an actual disability attached to it. And I realized I had never read a book about it that was a fiction book. That I've read, nonfiction biography sort of things where people talked about their struggle and things, but nothing for children really. So this is what I thought, this would have been something that I would have appreciated, knowing that, that the struggle wasn't just me.
Now, the word that you used, and I don't have it in front of me because, but I remember it because when we give books away on the show, we do it based on trivia.
Mm-hmm.
And the trivia question that I selected to give away that book was, what was the disability that the character had?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, the root of it was calculus in there somewhere. It was
dyscalculia.
Dyscalculia. Is that what it's?
Yeah, and I've heard British people call it dyscalculia, and it throws me off every time that I call it dyscalculia, because it sounds closer to dyslexia and I can remember it.
Oh, okay, right. So is that, how common is that?
It actually is about between 2 and 7% of school kids actually have dyscalculia. It's oftentimes not diagnosed simply because we tend to think, oh, well, just sit down and don't worry about it, because everybody gets a little nervous about math. People have, feel some kind of way about it. But a lot of times people, they equate, and there's overlap too. If you have dyscalculia and you switch your words around, you switch your letters around, sometimes you end up switching numbers around. And so it gets rolled into dyslexia a lot of the time. But yeah, it's not often actually diagnosed clearly. But when when you see it in a younger child, it's actually pretty clear, because when it starts, it seems to start really young. Like, you have a very small child who they skip, like you're teaching them their ABCs, and then you're teaching them to count to 100 or something. And they do things like skip an entire, like 38, 39, 50, that sort of thing. Making sense of ordered numbers and that sort of thing is difficult.
That's interesting. So, because I had never seen that word before.
Mm-hmm. There's very little, there's just not a lot out there about it, even though it is an actual, there are people whose entire business models, when they're working as tutoring companies and things, that's strictly around a numerical thing, but it's not something that's as well known, because dyslexia is, number one, I think, is because it a lot of the time people think boys have it more often, because it generally comes with behavioral things and attention deficits and all of that. And the way people, sort of manifest it, the girls are a little quieter, and, maybe they'll still be, behaving in a way that an adult will find acceptable, but they will still have a problem. And a lot of times, I think, if you aren't coming up with a behavioral problem in school, it gets overlooked. And they just think, well, she's just not good at that. And you get passed on a lot.
Okay. We had a 11-year-old author on the show last week.
Wow.
Who, she had dyslexia. And her mother encouraged her to write her thoughts down and write stories. So she has 2 books.
Wow.
So it was a real amazing interview.
Her mom, go back and look at that.
Yeah, she was the first interview for last week's show. So it was interesting, but she has dyslexia, and I asked her how she, how did it manifest? And hers is not words back, because they're different aspects of it. But hers were, sometimes she couldn't find the words in her mind, like she couldn't come up with the words. And when you're young, the words should just flow out, spout out. Is when you get older that sometimes you have to search, because you've had so many words that they're just all a jumble in your mind.
Yeah.
So, but that was interesting. So, tell us about the Figure It Out Henri Weldon and like the storyline. And do you have a copy of the book with you?
I do. Yes. I do. So,
yep. And it's beautifully illustrated.
Oh, you know what? The Instagram name of the lady who does it is it's Be Gifted, and she is gifted. I really, really like her illustrations. Are always so beautiful. The eyes of the characters are always what strike me. The story, her name is actually Henrietta, and she shortens it to all kinds of things. But she is a girl whose family's going through some changes. Her mother has decided to go back to school. And so she was at a special ed school, which is a private school. It cost them private school dollars. And they were said, well, in this shift we're going to make now, for this year, you're going to go to public school with your siblings, since your mom's not going to be working this year. She's going to finish school. And so it's a family commitment. She's going to go to school and do her best. And mom's going to do her best to finish. And they were going to work on this as a group. But she was excited because she had actually been wanting to go to public school. She hadn't gotten to go to public school since about second grade, since she had been put in a special school. And so she was excited. She was asking her sister, who's the best teacher, who's going to be this, who's going to be that. Her sister had some feelings, some kind of way about her being at her school, and basically was like, don't embarrass me, just keep your distance.
Oh.
And so she actually went in there with less concern about her learning disability and more concern about, her sister. And they had been real close, but, as time, her sister was a freshman in high school, and so the distance between sisters started to grow. And it's more, I wanted to write a story about a girl with a learning disability, but that's not actually the whole story, because no matter what broken places we have in us, that's not our whole story.
Right.
Our whole story is not going to be what we can't do. And I really feel it's very, very important to put that out there to our young people in books as soon as possible, so that they know that, sure, she has a learning disability, but she also plays soccer. She's making friends. She has a pet snake, which her mother really, really would like her not to have. And she's learning to write poetry. She's learning to love something else that's unique to her. So it's really, while there's her dyscalculia is an everyday occurrence. Every day, it's something you working on being on time. Timeliness is a real difficulty. She loses track of time. She loses track of where she is. She gets lost because she's not, her brain doesn't process spatial things. And so she'll make she has to say for left and right. She always has to do, okay, left. Which one is it? Left, you make that L. It just those things that she has, or it's an everyday part of her life. It's just living with a learning disability. It's not, about how, necessarily that she's a victim or she's suffering. No, it's a thing. It is what it is. And she's living with it and going on.
As a middle school teacher, because middle school is the bridge between, elementary school, the kids are small and young, and they tend to be more, well, I don't know if that's the case now. I might need to take it back, but easier to manage, maybe.
Obedient was the word you were looking for, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. But middle school is when they're not high schoolers yet, but they're starting to go through some signs of puberty. Some of them are going through puberty. And so as a middle school teacher, what are some of the things that you noticed about the children in that age group that we need to know about, or parents need to know about, society, other educators need to know about what happens in middle school? The middle school child, especially with reading, what's happening with them at that age?
Well, I know that many of my students really very much wanted to find books that were a little ahead of them. While, sure, they're 5th, 6th, 7th graders, but they wanted to read about kids who were older, who had already kind of passed through the moment that they were in. Okay. Because a lot of it, a lot of the time they were always looking ahead, and there's an impatience, you always, you hear kids say, no, I'm not 6, I'm 6 1/2, because that's important, that half.
Yeah.
the ability to get to the next phase is so pressing on them. There's such a restlessness and an eagerness to, move on. And so they're often very anxious to get to that next thing and hit that next level. But one of the things that when I write about kids in the middle grade stage, I want to sort of, get them to celebrate where they are now. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, I write books that I hope are books that can be read aloud and enjoyed. And, so that, they might feel that they're a little over and past that reading aloud stage. Nobody needs to read them a story, they can read it themselves. But, just to take that moment, take the time you're in, stay in it, be there and enjoy it. And really, and that way, what I do find too is because I like to, I try to talk about the span of emotions and things that they're going through at the time as they're reading, and as their parents are reading kind of, what they're reading and knowing what they're reading, they can maybe talk about it a little and start to process some of the things together. So when they get to that actual next stage, they're a little better prepared. They haven't broken all communication or whatnot, with the adults and the the older folk who care for them in their lives. So that's, I always, when I was a teacher, I always wanted to, try to encourage those conversations to continue. Because, when you're in elementary, your parents tell you. When you are in middle schools, that's when the sort of pushing back is you trying to tell them. It doesn't always work. But as as everybody's staying open to conversation in that stage. So hopefully by the time they are actual older kids and they're on their way to adulthood, those relationships and the processes and their fears and the hopes that they, get to read about in their fiction of that's for middle graders can be something that they're able to talk about and understand.
So, our the school where you taught, were the middle schoolers at grade level for reading? Or were they above grade level, or what is it like? I've never been a teacher. I helped homeschool for a while, just once a week though, my husband's grandkids.
Oh, that's great.
And they were, and I was happy to do it. I wish I was still doing it, but that's another story. They were so much on devices. So what I did we didn't use, everything had to be off. No tablets, no TV, nothing. We're going to do old school paper. We're going to read from a workbook. We're going to do equations and fill in the blanks. And some of us coloring, depending on the age, or word finds. We're going to do old school because that side of the brain doesn't get utilized if a person is always on devices. So they know a lot, but it's not always translated into what's on paper. That's what I found. And they were younger though. They were elementary school.
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't been actively teaching in a classroom for several years now. I would start with that. But I did find that my kids, they loved to read, but there was a lot of time where I didn't feel that they were reading things that were a challenge to them sometimes. And there's room for that sort of reading. There's room for the comfort reading. Reading is something that you already know, or, you have your stacks of your Calvin and Hobbes that you want to reread because you love that particular graphic novel / cartoon situation. But what I felt was really one of the things that I did as a classroom teacher was to try to encourage them to read up, not in necessarily topic, but to read up in challenge level, to challenge themselves, at least in a school setting, to say, okay, we're having, silent reading now. And sure, sustained silent reading, when we did it, was you could read whatever you wanted because that was your time. But when we read together, we read things that were a little more challenging so that they could read up and say, hey, I did that. I could do that. I could do that when I'm by myself even. I can manage that. So that was, my encouragement for them was just a little push. There are times, when you want to read that thing that's just for you, that you love, but then there are other times to step up and continue moving. And that for me is what education is best at, just those little encouraging pushes at the right time.
Okay. Now, what are some of your other books about? Some of your other, because you have several middle school. Oh, and then I read I thought this was really nice. I read in your bio that as a child you were chatty. Your mother said that you were chatty, and she told you to just write it down. It reminded me of myself, because my mother said once I started talking, I would talk all the time. But I was also a reader. But she said she would sometimes go in the bathroom to get away from me. So,
See,
I was a talker. I'm still talking.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was the youngest of three at the time. When we graduated from college, my parents adopted the last two foster children they have. So now I can officially say I'm a middle child. But at the time, as the youngest, my other two sisters went off to school, and I was like, ain't nothing to do around here anymore. So I literally followed my mother around just talking. And she was like, okay. And she'd hand me a pad of paper and sit me on a chair and say, okay, your radio station's off now. So it's the radio's quiet. So you have to write, so she is literally the person who encouraged me to write stories, because I had so many things to tell her. I wrote just reams of paper. She was like, great, I'll read it, but I don't want to hear it right now. So
yeah, each person has their own personal experience, especially if you're a writer and a reader. You have your own story, and they're similar, because we hear them from people who are on the show, but they're not the same, because we're all individuals.
Yeah.
So what are some of your other books, your other middle grade books?
Well, I'm writing for the last three that I've written with Catherine Teagan books is when I really first started writing middle grade. And the first book that I wrote was called Serena Says. And Serena is just a girl who wants very much to have her own TV show. So and her school has, morning news. They have a little broadcast that the students who are the best readers and public speakers are getting to be the reporters. And she really wanted to do that, but she wasn't as good of an out loud reader as she should have been. And so she was practicing. And the book is how she's, gets in her room and she sets up her mom's old camera and she sits there and she talks to it and does news reports. And so that's how she started to make herself sort of an online, little video thing where she would, talk a little bit about her day each day. And during the course of the school year, one of her classmates who, she is just closest friends with, one of her classmates goes and has she's hospitalized because she has a kidney transplant. And it's very exciting for her. This is something that her friend has been going to dialysis and has been very ill, so she's going to be better. And she looks forward to being the classroom ambassador to her friend, bringing everybody's gifts and good wishes to her. Well, instead, she gets a bad cold, and you can't be going to visit people when there's a transplant when you're sick. So she had to sit that out, and she was deeply disappointed. And then her good friend started to be friends with someone else. The girl who came and visited her, they got to be good friends, and she felt left out, and she acted ugly about it. And she had to work her way back to being, how she ought to have been, and understand that friendships change. You can make room for another person in your friendship, and you can also make a new friend yourself with somebody you hadn't even considered who would be worth being a friend to. In her case, she actually made friends with a boy in her class, which she thought she didn't want to be friends with a boy, but he actually turned out to be someone kind and someone who needed a friend. So that was Serena Says. And the book that I most recently after that wrote is wow. I'm looking at, I was going to actually pull a copy of it, but I don't want to have to go off camera. Never mind. My other books are, again, it's always a middle grade theme and a middle grade sort of concern. So a lot of my books I find are about friendship in the ways that the changes that you're going through with friends, because actually middle grade is the time when you have the biggest changes in your friend groups. Most of the time, the groups of friends that you have during middle school, that you fall out every other day with, you know, somebody here, somebody there, those friendships are always changing because through puberty and all of that, that's all change. And so there's very few things stay the same. And so most of the books have a big element of a friendship that was and then was no more. And everybody has to try to work their way back. Then the next book in the middle grade series is called Partly Cloudy. And it's about a girl who's her family moved because her parents, her dad lost his job. So they had to move to less expensive housing. And it turned out that the new school was not what it should have been in that district. And so she moves with her great uncle, a man in his 70s who's never had a little girl around. And they are family and they're going to work this out so she can go to school. And, you know, in that district, she lives with him during the week. And her plan was to go home on the weekends. The story is set in California during the fires. And so they're a fire actually comes within, you know, very close to where their homes are, and they're, you know, having to be concerned about evacuating. She's concerned about her mother reaching her. And she's also concerned because she's the only Black girl in this very white school. And she's tried to make a friend there, but her friend, the girl that she thought was her friend, had said some strange things that weren't quite what they should have been, and had some attitudes about Black people and Black men in particular. She didn't want to meet her Papa Lobo, her great uncle, and she didn't want to stay over at the house, even though she was alone and, you know, the fire was coming, and she, you know, well, my sister said this and that. And so they had to work through the differences of a friendship, but also in the light of race, and really confront what it means to be friends when you are a Black girl and you're friends with a white girl, and you have to learn to understand each other. So that seems like a heavy topic for middle grade, perhaps.
Well, no, because children are going through those things.
Exactly. It comes up, so it may as well be talked about.
Right. So, Tanita, thank you so much for being a guest. Now, before you go, let our audience know where they can find your books and like your website or your social media.
Okay. Well, my website is tanitasdavis.com. All of my books can be found in pretty much, you know, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any old place that sells books. Okay. Also, I am at Tanita_writes on Instagram. We don't know what's going on with Twitter, but while I am there, it's at Tanita_S_Davis for my Twitter blog. So yeah.
Okay. Well, congratulations on continuing to publish middle grade books, and we'll be on the lookout for your next one.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
Okay. All right. Have a great evening.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Well, that's our show for this week. Before we go, I do want to thank Mary Evans for kind of playing Rhonda's role, posting the links to the websites for the guests. Thank you very much, Mary. I appreciate you. So next week, we're going to have some, it's the first show for Black History Month. We're going to have some people that you haven't heard from in a while. You're going to love it. And that's all. And hopefully Rhonda will be here next week. She She missed today. She thought she was going to be on, but I know how it is when you're traveling, because I was traveling one time and thought I was going to be on too, and I couldn't. So sometimes you just can't log on. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. We will see you next Tuesday on another episode of Black Authors Matter TV. I'm Gwen Richardson signing off. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in, and join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for another edition of Black Authors Matter TV.